Life pro tip: if you're ever hanging out with your grandparents and they say something like, "It was the 60s," do not ask for any follow-up details. When somebody says something like that, what they're doing is the intuitive gesture of historically contextualizing something for you. They're saying the values and mores and norms and ideas and what was in everybody's head in your time is not the same as it was in my time. So try to understand the horrifying story about decisions I made as your grandfather in the context of a different time than your own. Like, we do this all the time. Again, this whole context thing, and indeed most of biblical study and interpretation, is very intuitive. In the last video, we talked about historical context as a general idea, a general starting place for making sense of the Bible. And as promised, I wanted to get into a few more of the specifics very quickly about how to actually do that in practice. When we're trying to wrap our brains around the historical context of a passage or a book of the Bible or a whole testament of the Bible, there are kind of two ways to go about this. And I want to talk about the less desirable one first. And that is, let someone else do all the work for you. Just Google it or read a commentary. You know what a commentary is, right? I got, here's one. This is a commentary on the book of Luke. And the way these things work is pretty smart. Bible scholars, maybe they don't agree with you on everything, but they're still smart. They go through and they make comments on every single verse of a book of the Bible. And they will usually include some kind of historical context, sometimes some literary details that'll be helpful as well. And that really can be a nice starting point. But commentaries come with a problem. They copy each other. Now, I'm not saying that all these guys and ladies who do this are plagiarizing, but maybe that whole interpretation of the passage, you've heard of the one where Jesus says it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. You've heard this, right? Well, you've probably also heard this bizarro interpretation, maybe even read it in commentaries, that the eye of a needle is a super secret gate in Jerusalem that was small and weirdly built because the people back then were very dumb and built stupid gates. And camels could still go through the gate, but it was really inconvenient. They'd have to squat down and bend their weird knobby elbows in strange ways and then fidget through, and it was just not a lot of fun. But I mean, obviously they can do it because obviously, like, Jesus, like, rich people are fine. Well, okay, that passage and the tensions that come with it are completely reconcilable, and the passage in the context of what Jesus is saying makes a ton of sense. But what happened there is somebody tried to use fake historical context news to make a difficult passage go away. There, see, it's solved. The new meaning is it's inconvenient for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, when you rely too heavily on commentaries, what you'll find is that people don't always cite sources, and sometimes they just draw the same data from what the last person said and the last person said. And so this idea of this gate that absolutely has never existed and is a total fraud was proliferated through several generations of commentaries, and you'll still hear ministers talk about this fake gate called the eye of the needle to this day. The problem with commentaries is that the sourcing can get weird. Commentaries rely on other commentaries, and maybe the biggest problem is they make you lazy. They make it so we don't do any of the work ourselves, which we'll get to in a minute. So one way to do your historical context work is to mostly just let somebody else do it and hope that they're right, or compare them with another commentator and hope that they're both right. A little better way to depend on someone else would be to include some of your own research. But usually in this day and age, when we do our own research, we're going to do that with the Googlebot. And so you jump onto the Googles and you Google something like, what the heck was the deal with Rome? And then a bunch of stuff comes up. But have you ever really deeply researched a topic on the internet? Because if you have, you're going to see this coming from a mile away. If you haven't, earth-shattering news, most of the knowledge isn't actually on there. There are these pockets of information, again, often wrong information, that are unsourced, that the top return on a Google search has at the right moment in history when everybody's looking for that information, then everybody from all these different places goes and grabs that information. They repeat it in their unsourced articles or whatever, and pretty soon you've got it being held out that wedding rings originated in Egypt as some sort of ritual back in the day, and then everybody else just picked it up from there. But I was recently digging around on this, and a friend was telling me that no, according to pretty good Egyptologists, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. It's just an internet myth that keeps getting repeated. The Bible pushes back on us, which makes the Bible a document that is begging to be misinterpreted and misunderstood. This doesn't always jive with what we already assume. So there will be no shortage of honest people who think they're doing good research, I don't know, maybe me too, who intuitively will gravitate toward the information that relaxes the tension and difficulty of the passage in their own life. Then this stuff will get repeated on the internet, and this includes biblical research about the historical context of the day. So, one way to do your historical context research is to let other people mostly do it for you. And, well, picking up what I'm laying down, I think that is risky. But let's talk about the second option. A second way to do the historical context research for yourself is to do it for yourself. I guess I just said it right there in the title. Do it for yourself. This isn't actually that hard. I know it seems overwhelming if this isn't your discipline. You feel like, I don't know a lot about history. That's so much more work. It's not. Really, it's not. Do you remember that feeling in maybe your first year of algebra? Or for me, I really felt this when I did trig in high school. Do you remember the feeling when for the first time ever, you understand why the formula is what the formula is? And you take this thing you're trying to understand and you plug all of it into the formula, and the variables all start to click and make sense, and out comes an answer that makes sense, and you understand why. I just loved that. It was like puzzle pieces fitting together like they should. Like, I am participating in solving this thing. This is a blast. History is not that different for those of you who aren't into it. Books like these that I've got sitting right here are easy reads. I mean, they're fun. There's all kinds of history that is of quality scholarship that is designed for normal people to read and get a sense of the big picture. So if you want to do this historical research stuff for yourself, you don't have to go get a new degree, but maybe just pick up a few books. Maybe grab a survey of Roman times. Maybe grab a survey of the intertestamental period, Alexander the Great, the Greek cultural expansion. All of that stuff is ready accessible. I guarantee you, if you're not bored and you haven't quit this video yet, you are way more than smart enough to dig through that and understand it. And then suddenly you've got this framework of knowledge. Think of it like four pieces of wood nailed together in a square. I'm sorry I did that to you. And a grid of fishing line is stretched with 3 lines horizontal and 3 vertical. Now, if you take that and you dip it in a vat of hot wax and lift it up, not very much of that hot wax is going to stick because your filter isn't very dense and most stuff will pass through it. But I don't know, some stuff sticks to it, and that wax will harden around each of those little lines of filament, and well, the next time you dip into that, more is going to stick. And the next time, more is going to stick, and more is going to stick. And each dip into the past, into the world of history, is going to make more of it make sense. You won't even notice this is happening the same way you don't notice that your puppy is getting bigger until somebody who hasn't seen you in forever is like, whoa, your dog is huge. One day you'll just wake up and you'll be like, whoa, I kind of get this historical context for myself. You know, 5 years ago, if somebody had said Tiberius, I don't really know where that guy fits, but now Tiberius tried to pass through my filter and my filter was dense enough that it caught that. And now Tiberius is part of the filter instead of something that passes through. You can build this quickly, especially since we're only looking at a pretty limited amount of time when we're studying the New Testament. Start to build that grid, to build that filter for yourself, and you will love seeing how stuff starts to stick to it, and in doing so, thicken it and make it more ready for your next foray into that classical world or into the world of the Bible. So doing this for yourself, I think, changes the game entirely. It also brings you the joy of discovery for yourself. It also keeps you from falling into the rhythm of all of the same tried and true interpretations that might be accurate and might not. You will feel more ownership of your walk with God and your study of the scripture, or your not walk with God and your rejection of the scripture, if that's where you are, if you embrace these things. The final interpretive goal of all of this is, like we were saying in that last video, to get to a place where you become culturally, historically bilingual, where you can imagine how the original audience would have heard this, where you can read John 1 and imagine, 400 years before this, Plato was doing all the thinking, and that had really disseminated around this Eastern Mediterranean world. I bet everybody who read John 1 thought of Plato and the philosopher king right there. When you get into the last few chapters of Acts, you'll think to yourself, Caesarea Maritima, oh, that was a seat of power. I can imagine how the original audience would have pictured Paul's time in captivity there, and these governors and their relationship with Rome. I can picture where they were at politically and how the original audience would have envisioned where they were at politically. What happens is, instead of being an outside onlooker trying to guess what was going on and what stuff meant, suddenly you're more than just a tourist in that world. You are staying on a guest visa. And these things start to make more sense and click, and then you land where you need to land. We got a whole bunch more to talk about. I think I sounded like that Lucky Charms thing for a second there. We've got a whole bunch more to talk about on this stuff regarding context. Look forward to getting into that in future videos. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Thanks for doing this with me. See you soon.